Welcome to the School's Motivational Speaker Podcast. My name is Harun Rabbani. I'm a school's motivational speaker. Like I've said before, this is something that I created to help disseminate information to parents, to teachers, to students, to help young people break through glass ceilings, break through concrete ceilings, and really live a life of amazingness rather than mediocrity or poverty or lack of abundance. I've been interviewing some amazing guests across the beginning of this first season that we've started. And what's interesting is how everything just fits hand in glove. If you've watched my episode with Lise Cabell, who talked about theatre productions and dealing with abuse, directly working with students, well, we're going to flip it and look at a different side. But before we do that, I want you to imagine, if you haven't watched the movie Groundhog Day, you should go and watch it. And if you have watched Groundhog Day, just remind yourself, imagine that you're born and you live a certain life, you have certain ways of doing things, the way you think, the way you behave, the way you react, and you've created a narrative in your lifetime, some of which are good and some of which are absolutely horrible. Next generation, your children come along, they replicate the exact same thing, except in a different body, except in a different package, maybe different environment, but it's the same thing again and again. Now, when you operate from this space of hurt and pain being repeated, which it does, by the way, it's called intergenerational trauma. This is how bad intergenerational trauma is. Back when the British Empire was colonizing India, we had, I think, in the space of 150 years, about 25 or so famines, of which some were real, created because of real natural issues. Others were manufactured. The starvation and the loss of hundreds of millions of lives resulted in those who survived developing a trauma where the body goes into starvation mode. So today, decades later, we're in a space where if you are born in the Indian subcontinent, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, you are more likely to develop diabetes in your 20s compared to a European who'll develop it in their mid 40s. It's not too dissimilar for people from the Caribbean, for example, and lots of countries have intergenerational trauma for different reasons. Irish with the potato famine, they've got it as well. So 6 times more likely to become diabetic if you're from the Indian subcontinent compared to a European. But today we're going to be talking about something else. We're going to be talking about other areas of intergenerational trauma. And my guest today is Tracy Kelly, hailing from Australia. Tracy, welcome to the School's Motivational Podcast.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me on.
You're very welcome. So tell us about your own early life, which on the face of it looked normal, but actually it's far from that. Please fire away.
I thought that our family was the most normal family under the sun. My father went to work, my mother went to work. We had good food on the table, we had grandparents, we went on holidays. We did all the normal stuff. But it wasn't until I got into my teenage years that I realized that our family wasn't quite that normal. My parents used to drink every day. Other kids' parents didn't drink at all. And I just would look at my mum when she'd come home from work, and the first thing she'd do would be get changed, and then she would go and get herself, in Australia, everybody loves beer. So she would go and get a beer, and that's what she would drink while she was getting dinner ready into the night, and then she'd go to bed. And then she'd wake up in the morning hungover, and I used to think to myself, I don't know how she does that. And then I came to realize, like, it's just not a normal thing to do. I realized that my parents were functioning alcoholics. My father used to like to gamble, and he did that with his hobby thing, but he always was betting on the horses. So I came to realize that our family, we were living in functioning dysfunction.
How does that story you've just shared, how did that affect your own life, your own growing up through schooling period, your early career? How did that affect you?
I felt like I was invisible in the family. There was, looking back now, there was a lot of emotional neglect. There was very little encouragement. Back then, women were seen to just go off to become a secretary, get married, and that was that, whereas my brothers got all the investment. So I felt very invisible, like I had no worth, and that impacted on my self-esteem and my self-confidence. And today it still does have a lingering effect. So this is lifelong things that we have to live with and manage as we navigate life as an adult. So I found that my confidence was really affected mostly, and my self-worth was affected.
When your self-worth is affected, it has far more repercussions than people can possibly imagine. And people play down completely the whole thing about self-worth and self-esteem. Dr. John D. Martini, a brilliant philosopher and a motivational speaker, has been on lots of documentaries. He says your self-worth is directly related to your net worth. Now, it's
Mm.
all about obviously perception. So, how do you think other people, so young people in schools, if they're in such an environment, how do you think that's affecting their behaviors, their exam results, their aspiration?
They would be quite limited in their own level of self-belief, and it just has a flow-on effect. Uh, the best thing that the young people can do is engage with the school counsellor and find guidance that way, so they can get support at school and find people at school that will be able to invest in them to bring out the best in them. Because sometimes you just don't get that at home, but there'll be a teacher at school that absolutely loves you, that wants to help and encourage you to be your best and help develop the self-worth. They can see the potential that perhaps the parents can't see, because the parents are lost in their own world of pain. So I'd strongly recommend that the young people connect into someone they resonate with at school, whether it be the school counsellor or a favourite teacher, and then seek support that way.
You do particular work with women. What exactly do you do to help them?
I work with women that realise that they're living in a chaotic, dysfunctional relationships, and that awareness comes over time. So we sort of look around and compare our relationships to other relationships, and then we realise that perhaps our partner is not as loving as he could be, or there is a level of neglect, whether it be emotional, psychological, financial. So there's slow realizations over time, and there's a point where the woman realizes that the relationship is unhealthy and would like to do something about it, because we want to have a happy, loving relationship, and we want our kids to be in that environment. So I work with women that realize that their relationship is quite chaotic and it's not what they want it to be. And I help them start on their inner journey to be able to look at their own self and their own past and their own conditioning, to then be able to make the changes to create the life that they want, a life that's full of confidence, love, happiness, and really it's your happy ever after.
What are the most common signs and symptoms that someone's is in a dysfunctional relationship? I'm not talking about the violence because that's obvious. What are the smaller telltale signs?
There's signs of unfulfillment, perhaps some depression. There's just a feeling of something's really not quite right. There's a lot of intangible elements to this as the awareness starts to grow. So it's just that feeling of this relationship's really not making, I'm not feeling fulfilled in this relationship. I'm not 100% happy in this relationship. The realizations just come slowly over time. So for me personally, when I started to realize that my marriage was not very good, I started to feel like I was very alone. I was not heard. I was invisible. I felt depressed. I felt hopelessness. I felt despair. So all of these little underlying emotions come to the surface over time. And that obviously impacts on mood and the ability to be able to be present in the classroom and be able to teach in the best possible way.
People don't realize the effect of moods on your decision making. I remember
Mm,
when my oldest son was only, I think, about 6 or something, very playful, always having fun, not
mm,
boisterous, but not in a disturbing kind of way, as in he didn't disturb other people. Everyone used to go on about how well behaved he was. It was interesting
mm,
because I was picking him up. I was single dad by then. I was picking him up from school one day, and he was one of the last kids to come out. And the teacher didn't realize I was outside waiting for my son, looking in, and the teacher was shouting and screaming at him. I was horrified. What is this woman doing? And it was a few weeks later, it was parents' evening where both my son's mother, my ex-wife, and I and my son, we went into parents' evening, and I asked both of them to leave once we had that initial conversation. I said to the teacher, I said, I don't know what's going on in your life. My son is 6 years old. I know his behavior. But nothing in the world gives you the right to shout and scream at my son. So either that stops today, or I will do something about it. I'll have words with your head of school and I will take it further. After that, now I didn't shout it out, I didn't scream it out, I didn't threaten her. I made a promise. I didn't like the fact that I had to do that, but it was interesting because for the rest of that year, my son was in that class. She was so nice to him. She was shouting and screaming. What was interesting is, I know as someone who's also a therapist that she doesn't mean to be like that. Like parents don't mean to be horrible. Whatever's going on inside of themselves, they've not addressed it, but they're projecting it out. It could be signs of sadness, depression. Young people pick it up. They will pick up your vibe. So when someone finds themselves, either as a parent or a teacher, finds themselves in that position that the emotions are starting to affect their focus, what are some of the steps they are taking to redress the balance within themselves?
The easiest thing that people can do, the number one step that anybody can do, is to literally take a deep breath. Take a deep breath and hold that breath for 4 seconds and then let it out for 4 seconds. Hold, breathe in for 4 seconds, hold, breathe out for 4 seconds, hold. And it's called box breathing. So when the teacher feels or the parent feels like they're about to blow up for whatever reason, and that can happen in a split second, like we have to be very mindful to catch ourselves before something erupts and literally breathe so we can calm the central nervous system down, so the front of our brain switches on to then make better decisions. So in the case of the teacher screaming at your son, who knows what was going on in her life? But she was clearly worked up enough and her brain would be shut down and not able to make a decision to speak calmly to your son for whatever reason was going on. And if the person is able to just breathe, literally breathe until they feel the heated emotion calm down, they can then respond in a much clearer, calmer way that's going to have a more positive impact. So breathing is key. Self-regulation is key.
Before you say anything, I have to say thank you. You're one of the first people who's even mentioned about breathing and breathing techniques. I'll bring in a therapist at another point, but the point is that most people, the way they breathe is only one micro step away from a panic attack. And I watch them, it's like, they're breathing in for a couple of seconds and they might hold their breath, but their breathing out is very shallow and not for long. So there's no balance. So they're constantly activating the sympathetic nervous system, which most people don't know what that is, but that's fine. Sympathetic nervous system is not about sympathy. It's that system which activates you, gets you into fight or flight, gets you energized, etc. But the opposite, the parasympathetic nervous system, is about relax, rest, digest, calm down. And what you've just, I don't know if you have that science knowledge, and I'll ask you more in a second, but basically what you're suggesting is it balances both out. So it takes you away from panic. Is there anything you can say about the nervous system?
It's very important to breathe from the diaphragm. So if people visualize breathing up from the bottom of their feet and straight all the way up behind the back of their nose, like their breath is coming out through their eyes, that's the best way to get the breath right up, because you're correct. We need to calm down our central nervous system. We want to get the parasympathetic nervous system activated so the front of our brain switches back on, and then we can make decisions that are rational and calm decisions as opposed to reacting from the opposite side of our system where our brains shut down and we just completely react without thinking about it. And then there's all sorts of fallout consequences based on that. So the whole situation is to learn to breathe, literally learn to breathe.
So share with us another couple of techniques that
Mm.
parents and teachers can use, and actually so can students, by the way, they can use that will help them to really create a bit more balance.
I just think I really am a big advocate of the breathing because we have to self-regulate. And then I think mindfulness is the next thing that we can do. That can help us connect into the present moment. We can find that something will trigger us off, and that could take us back into the past, which elicits all kinds of thoughts and memories. And again, we could then react from a place that we don't really want to react from. So becoming mindful in the present moment is another technique that's really quite important. And we can do that really easily by listening for 3 things out of our ear and just take a deep breath in and listen for 3 things out of our ears. Look for 3 things out of our eyes. Feel 3 things. Taste 3 things. And we're just using our 5 senses. And that will connect us back into the here and now. We can focus on some breathing at the same time. And that helps us stay in the present moment.
The workshop that you do, I know you're not providing that at the moment anyway in England. It's online or is it in person? But
For people that are in a different country, we do the workshop online.
what is the space someone is in? And you mentioned you work primarily with women. What is the space someone's in where they need to, they must? Obviously, nobody has to, but they
Mm.
must really start considering somebody like yourself.
From my experience, people get to, men as well as women, get to a certain point in their life where they're faced with a choice. And it's something that we intrinsically know within. We either carry on the way we are or we make a choice to make a change. So I work with women that are at that point where their lives are in a place that's creating so much unhappiness and inner turmoil, and all around is chaos, and they want to go and make the internal changes to create a life that they truly desire. So I work with women that get to that point where they actually want to take the action and take the steps. So they can come and participate in the workshop, and that's the beginning of the journey, the inner journey of transformation.
So the journey is really about the internal stuff. It's what I find interesting working with people who've
Mm,
had trauma is
mm,
that very often, if you ask them what they want, let's say people who've been through domestic violence,
mm,
she or he might say, I no longer want somebody who's verbally abusive. I no longer
mm,
want somebody who's going to be horrible to me and be
mm,
unkind with their words. I don't want someone who's violent or toxic towards me. So
mm,
people very much focus on what they don't want, where attention goes, energy flows, and surprise, surprise,
mm,
they of it. So if you don't know, you don't know. Even if you've had a great life at one point and then you go through this horrible situation where you're in a dysfunctional or toxic relationship,
mm.
what can they be paying their attention to about their desires?
The outcome they're looking for is they want the pain to go away. They want to be out of emotional pain, be out of emotional turmoil. They want calmness, they want happiness, and they want a fulfilled life. And this workshop takes women on a journey from, it's a starting point to have a look at how their life actually ended up where it is. So then we can start to change it and take it to the place where they want it to be. And the one thing that everybody that attends this workshop wants is to be out of the emotional pain, to have more clarity about what their purpose is in life and why they come here on the planet. And it's all their whys. So we help them understand how they got to where they are and what they can do to change. And then it's just a matter of going through the process. And I work with women as they go through the process, as the things that come up that need to be healed.
Tell me about where you're located in Australia.
I live in Brisbane, which is the capital of Queensland. It's a subtropical area. It's the 3rd largest city in Australia, and it's really nice here.
Are you actually doing retreats? I've run retreats for years and years. I've not been to
Mm.
Australia. Are you actually hosting retreats, or are you workshops a few days long? How does that work for you?
It's a 6-week workshop, so we meet once a week, and eventually I will do it as a retreat, like a 6-day retreat. So that's something that's in the planning a bit further on down the track. But at the moment, we meet via Zoom and once a week over a 6-week period, and that also gives people participants time to really, you know, reflect on what the content of the week is during the course of the week to then bring extra things to the table at the beginning of the following week. When we do a retreat, it's very intensive. It'll be a very intensive 6-day program, and it'll be structured slightly differently to for the maximum benefit of the retreat.
When a parent or a teacher is in a dysfunctional relationship at home, what can they currently do before they even come to your workshop? What can they currently do to placate their situation, or at least take back some of their own personal power?
That's a very good question, and that can look different for people because it really depends on their circumstances. My number one recommendation would be to start to look at boundaries and put some boundaries in place about what the person will accept and not accept while they're planning on what they're going to do with their future. Because it could be that they want to get out of the relationship. So it might require, if it's domestic violence, it might require a plan of action, like a plan to put together to actually go. Because sometimes it's not very easy to get out of these situations, especially if there's children involved, if there's financial constraints. So it's really unique to each person. But my first, thing would be to have some boundaries in place while planning to leave the relationship, or if there is an opportunity for the other partner to go on a healing journey as well. So it's really it's quite a broad question, and there's no one answer that fits all. It's just unique to the person's situation.
I think there's a humanitarian element to
Yeah.
it, which is this is only my view. If you are in a violent relationship, you walk away, you
Oh
find a
yes,
way.
totally.
There,
You need
there,
to get
there
out.
are refugees, not
Mm,
refugees, there's centers that
yes.
will look after you. You have to Google
Mm,
them, and they don't publicize
mm,
widely. So pick up the phone.
mm,
This could be a man or a woman. If you're in a violent situation, that's like it's illegal. It's now become criminal. So
yes.
if you're in that criminal situation, it doesn't matter about anything else. Your life
Is most important.
is most important. You need to walk away.
Mm,
So I think we can set that boundary. Besides violence, which is
mm,
obvious, besides that, and by the way, if you're going through it, you may even be numb to the same situation happening again and again. Still, even if you're used to it, you need to walk away.
mm,
You are actually the fact that you're alive, you've got something to do here on the planet. You have a purpose,
mm,
and someone like Tracy actually
mm,
specifically helps you find your purpose. So if you're in that situation, don't make excuses for the other person. There's not a single valid reason in
mm,
God's earth that someone needs to raise their finger at you, let alone get violent. So let's just keep that clear. Turn for
mm,
help. Don't try to do it at all on your own. Don't wait to be, you need courage, but don't use your courage to just figure out yourself. No, no, that's not good enough. You have to pick up the phone or go and meet someone. I'm talking about a professional, get their guidance, get their support, and get the hell out of
mm.
this, especially if there's children involved. Because if children are, well, what will happen if a child, Tracy, is witness to violence and abuse?
The children will suffer a lot of trauma. It will psychologically, emotionally affect them all their life, and they will have a greater propensity to become abusers themselves. The mother to get herself and her children out of a violent relationship is paramount. There are organisations that can help women to make a safety plan to get out. So it's just a matter of connecting into those resources to get the plan in place, have a refuge place to go to, or a safe place to go to then start to rebuild life. And I've been in that kind of relationship myself, and there's a lot of navigating to get out, but getting out is so worth it. Nobody deserves to experience any physical pain whatsoever or
Yeah, and
violence.
this happens. a
Mm.
lot more than you can meet the eye, than meets
It's
the eye, I
very,
should say.
behind the closed doors situation.
Yeah, there's a lot of shame, fear, shame, and guilt used,
Mm,
a lot of manipulation. So
mm,
let's talk about some of your, without mentioning any names, any specific people.
mm,
Can you share any stories of people who've been through your program, who've maybe been through a dysfunctional situation
mm.
and walked away from it and got a new life, or what does that life look like?
Yes, I can. There's one particular young woman that stands out. She's, in her early 30s. She comes from a very nice family, but again, that family was very unaware of their behavior and how that's impacted on her. And they didn't get out of bed to hurt and harm her. They just were unaware of their own issues that they were carrying. So she's gone into her into her teen years and her early 20s, just drinking and partying. And during the course of that time, her other friends that came from different families found partners, got married, had children, and she was struggling in every relationship that she got into. They just weren't working, and she was attracting men that were not healthy men. So she's found herself at 32 still looking for her purpose. She's in a relationship that is showing toxicity, and she's just had enough. She wants to feel good about herself. So she's been doing the program. She's actually in the midst of the program, and she's starting to realize that she can make the changes, and she started making the changes, and she's got hope, and she's got a roadmap forward, and she can see the specific areas that just need that extra bit of healing, and her transformation's already begun. She's, it's beautiful to watch because A, she's ready, B, she's doing the work, and the results are starting to come. So it's just, when you see people going through the transition and having their aha moments and then implementing all that, it's a beautiful thing.
When you mentioned about your own childhood, did you feel a sense of disconnection from your family, your friends, or your parents?
Yes, I felt like I was in the wrong family. Was seen as a black sheep of the family. I I just couldn't even understand why I was in this family, to be quite honest. So yes, totally disconnected.
It's a leading question because I want to share with you. If I've got the book here, here we go.
Mm,
Not something I wrote. I wish I did. This is written by
connected.
Nicholas Christakis and
Mm,
James Fowler. Connected. Everyone should be reading this book. Here's why.
mm,
Their university, Harvard. One, I think, the one's from Harvard, the other one's from
mm,
University of California, San Diego,
mm,
and they've looked at real life networks, real life social networks. Here's what they found: that those people who are in the center of networks, I'm not talking about business networking, by the
mm,
way, they've got meaningful relationships or relatively meaningful relationships with lots of people, tend to be the happiest, healthiest, live longest, and are more successful in their careers. Those on the periphery of it, meaning, so imagine a spider's web and you got one person
mm,
right at the end, tend to be more suicidal, depressed,
mm.
and
Disconnected.
just disconnected. They're
Mm,
literally hanging off, well, not literally, almost literally hanging off
mm,
by a thread into life.
mm,
And when you're raised in a family where you feel like you're the only
mm,
person there, then you are going to be predisposed to depression,
mm,
anxiety, and all sorts of other issues. So, how do you encourage your the ladies who come to you, the women who come to you, how do you
mm,
encourage them to start rebuilding their lives, rebuilding relationships, considering they've come from a dysfunctional relationship background?
mm. Well, I recommend that they find one thing that they really enjoy and then tap into that kind of network. So it might be that they love gardening, so they could join a gardening group. So that gives them a sense of belonging somewhere. They don't have to go there and talk about their stuff. They can just show up because they love gardening and they've got something of a common interest to talk with others. They've got a connection to something that they enjoy within themselves, and then they've got a connection to other people. They have a sense of belonging, and we know that if we have a sense of belonging, we feel intrinsically so much better
Mm.
than if we feel disconnected and on our own. So I would recommend finding one little area of interest that creates happiness and joy, and then join a little group.
So I lived in this place in London 20 years ago in this block of apartments, and they were really nice
Mm,
apartments, so people were really well to do. And I think there was only 3 floors. And I remember this one guy called Mark. Every time I'd see him, I'd say, "Good morning, Mark. Good afternoon, Mark. Good evening." Not all three at the same time, but obviously
mm,
relative to the time of day. "How are you?" "I'm good." He'll say good morning back.
mm,
But not one point did he ever, if I didn't say anything, he'd never instigate conversation. And
mm,
London is very famous, or used to be very famous for that. I now live in a village where you can't walk 100 yards without someone stopping you to see how you are. This is very unheard of in England, by the way,
mm,
but it makes such a difference to your own health and happiness. So I'm really happy to hear that. If you're enjoying this conversation that I'm having with Tracy Kelly, then go to the show notes. You can connect
mm,
with Tracy, and if you want to go to a workshop, the podcast isn't about promoting anyone or any one person or the other, but it's actually helping to encourage you and impress upon you that if you're a teacher going through a very difficult situation at home, then you are going to impact on your students. And what I'm impressing upon you, what we're impressing upon you, is actually there's help out there, and it's good quality help. If you're a parent and you're in a toxic relationship, you can potentially ruin a life. So can teachers, by the way. You can
mm.
ruin a life, or you can transform a life, but it needs to start from within, and it needs to start with you. Tracy, one final question, series of questions. Bearing in mind your own upbringing, if you could go back in time to the 7-year-old version of you and you could say a few words of wisdom or guidance or support or encouragement to 7-year-old Tracy, what would you say to her? Just a few words.
Everything will be okay. Everything will be okay, and you are okay.
Fast forwarding to 12, 13 years of age, what would you say to Tracy then?
You're still okay, and you're a beautiful young woman, and just keep going.
And then finally, the 18-year-old version of you, what would you tell her?
You need to go to counselling and get some help.
Those are the words we would have told ourselves that. And it's quite interesting
Mm,
because those are the kind of words a 7-year-old need to hear. Not every 7-year-old, but actually, from what you've just said, every 7-year-old, you are okay, you're beautiful or handsome
mm.
or both. Every 13-year-old and every 18-year-old. Tracy, thank you so much for coming on the School Motivational Speaker podcast and sharing a bit of insight of your background about what you do and how you're helping women, particularly both in the domestic situation and the schools situation as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.